In this conversation, we're going to have about going from unsecure to cybersure. So the conversation is about cybersecurity, which is becoming more and more of a hot topic. And we will be doing an anonymous poll, it's an anonymous poll to ask if anybody has been breached. So we won't know who you are, but it'd be really interesting to know if there's anyone on the call who has suffered a security breach. So just by way of introduction to Serdar first, and then I'll hand over to Nico when we go through the scary stats. So for those of you who have not heard of Serdar, the name comes from the lead Sherpa on a mountain expedition, and it's really all about going on the journey with someone rather than the typical consultant kind of approach where here's the report, I may support you, but I'm not really going with you as a partner on the journey and pulling you out of the way. And the reason why one of our books is called Traversing the Avalanche is because part of the Serdar's job is to pull you out of the way if they can see the danger coming. So it's a much more forceful relationship than typically we would have from coach or consultant. And the analogy about climbing the mountain is really representing the business. So how big a business do you want to build? How big a mountain do you want to climb? And we'll help and support you on the journey, helping you prepare with the right tools, the right team, etc. at base camp, and let's take you to the summit. And we cover lots of bases. So we cover anything to do with the boardroom. So making sure directors are properly trained, make sure you've got the right directors, non-exec directors specifically in the room, and then ongoing board support. So that's the support to the summit that we provide. So with me in the room and about to go through the scary stats is Nico. So Nico Duplessis is the co-founder and CTO of Glucode. And he's been instrumental in steering the company through the complex digital waters of the banking and finance sectors. And over the past 14 years, his visionary leadership has been pivotal in developing mobile applications that not only deliver exceptional user experiences, but also uphold the stringent security protocols these industries demand. Before his entrepreneurial journey, Nico honed his skills in various IT roles, amasses a wealth of knowledge in cybersecurity, systems architecture, software development. His keen insight into digital vulnerabilities and his relentless pursuit of innovation has earned him a reputation as a thought leader in the industry. So yes, we'll put Glucode's link, and we'll put Nico's email if you wish to get in touch with him in the chat box. And interesting, so I haven't really introduced myself, but I'm senior partner at Serdar, and I've been with Serdar since 2013. But in my previous life, I was 27 years, I was in asset management software, and I ran a company called FinSwitch for 11 years, which is the data switch for the unit trust industry. And we very much had to worry about cybersecurity even 10 years ago. So lots of tests on access and SQL injections we were talking about earlier before everyone joined the call. So yes, I'm excited to hear a little bit more from Nico about all of these terrible things that have been happening in the world. So I'm just going to put the whole slide up, Nico, and then you can talk to whichever ones you fancy. But there's some really, really scary stuff out there.
Thanks for the intro, Tim. Do you want to do an intro for Ralph real quick as well before we get started?
I'll do an intro for Ralph in a minute. So I'm going to save the best for last.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, welcome everyone. We appreciate you taking the time to join us today to talk about this very important and hot topic. If you've been following the news lately, it's almost impossible for a week to go by without some kind of cybersecurity incident or breach on the world stage to make it into the news. And that obviously affects all of us, both in our personal and professional capacities. So as Tim mentioned, just some of the scary stats to really know. So phishing attacks really are responsible for roughly about 90% of data breaches that we see in the world, with approximately 3.4 billion daily spam emails being sent, of which a large chunk of that really is phishing or some sort of security test in a way. In 2019, we saw roughly 80% of all data breaches being attributed to compromised passwords, leading to both significant financial losses for businesses and consumers. And those can either be from passwords that were breached through phishing, or passwords that have been breached by companies that have been breached. So if you have a Facebook or a LinkedIn or a Twitter account, if those companies get breached and their data gets dumped, if they stored your unencrypted or weakly encrypted passwords in their databases and that gets dumped, that also leads to breaches further down the line. The healthcare industry has been one of the costliest for breaches. They obviously carry very, very sensitive and personal information. And so when something like a ransom incident or a data breach happens, either from the ransom side or the penalties that follow on these breaches, extremely costly for those institutions. And we can see in 2022, the breach cost reached roughly about 10.10 million US dollars. In 2022, we've also seen 493 odd million ransomware attacks being detected by organizations worldwide, a massive amount, and that is on the rise.
That's really scary, Jeepers.
It's so much time, and because of the automation possibilities and the increase in AI assistance for these types of attack, it's negligible effort to send these out. So we'll really just see those going up and up and up in the years and months to come. The global average for data breach cost was around 4.3 million US dollars, which is a sizable chunk of money. And again, we've seen those either from the cost of ransomware demands or the penalties that followed breaches. The average cost of breaches resulting from stolen or compromised credentials amounted to 4.5 million. This is actually one of the scariest stats for me, is 39% of UK businesses reporting suffering a cyber attack in 2022. 40% of all businesses in the UK reporting a breach in 2022. That's just astronomical, and something to really pay attention to.
Yeah, so that's just not an attack, it's actually a breach.
No, I think these were attacks.
Oh, attacks, okay.
But those, sorry, I misspoke if I said breaches. But another thing to note also is just consider how many people actually know they were attacked or breached versus how many do report it. There's obviously some reputational damage that you incur there if you do report it. And plenty of businesses, especially in the SME space, just do not have the skills or capacity to look at logs and to understand whether they have really been attacked or breached. In 2023, we've seen 300,000 fresh malware instances being generated daily. Again, just astronomical, the pace and the increase in these occurrences. 92% distributed through email. So that's whether you click on a link that takes you to a website that serves a drive-by download, whether there's an attachment to the email, a PDF or a Word document that serves to exploit known software vulnerabilities, and then with an average of 49 days to be detected. And I think that just speaks to the previous point I was trying to make, is there are very, very few people that actually have a SOC or a security team that looks at these things on a daily or hourly basis and understands where the threats are. And there's one stat that's not on the slides that I just want to share with, since we have a lot of South Africans in the webinar. So in April 2023, we had some stats around South Africa specifically, and South Africa ranks 5th in the world for cybercrime incident density, which is really quite scary.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that is scary. There was a question in the chat box, which country do the cyber attacks come from when it comes to South African companies? So in other words, who's the source?
It's very difficult to say. So, I mean, obviously, when we talk about threat actors, we both have state-sanctioned threat actors and just the general guy trying to make a buck. Some of the very naughty countries are Russia, China, some of our Northern African partners. But within South Africa, there are plenty of people trying to make a buck as well. And obviously some of these, it's a bit difficult to ascertain exactly where they're coming from, because they all try to hide their tracks a little bit. So they might proxy through the US when they do command and control servers. So yeah, but yeah, we generally see those coming from the countries mentioned.
Sure. No, very, very scary. And the main reason why we decided to put this call together is because we're not seeing, so working with boards, we're definitely not pushing it enough. So that was with a big wake-up call for us. But we're not seeing boards naturally having enough expertise on the boards in terms of cybersecurity. So I'm just going to put a poll up just to get a sense of who we have in the room from a leadership perspective. So if you are the information security officer, so it's a multi-choice, so just tick the ones that apply. And then, it's like Siri's listening, or Alexa, or whoever is listening. So immediately after we started talking about the framework for this cybersecurity webinar, I received an email entitled, "How much cybersecurity expertise does a board need?" It's like, no way. That's just ridiculously irrelevant. So there's the opening line was, whether a specific requirement or not, companies must either educate their board of directors in cybersecurity and risk management, or look to recruit directors with specific cybersecurity experience to improve organizational response and decision making. And then later on, they made the point, the question is, how many boards are equipped with sufficient cybersecurity expertise to help their organizations navigate all of this? And a growing cohort of experts say not nearly enough. And that's our experience. We're not seeing cybersecurity mentioned on board agendas as anything like nearly enough. And it's a challenge for us going forward to make sure that happens. And I suppose that's a good segue to introduce Ralph. So our service provider, and I'll just get to you in a minute, Pakimile. We use cybersecurity. We use board software to try to mitigate some of the risks of sending board papers via email, etc., storing on drives, all of those kind of things which have multiple access points. And I'm using the particular software package that Ralph represents, which is Onboard. So that's our preferred software package. And it just makes sense. I mean, it really scares me when we're sending confidential signed documents and things via email. Whereas with Onboard, you log in and all the papers are there. You don't need to download anything. It's all in front of you. So Ralph is the managing director of Onboard Africa, a seasoned IT professional with over 27 years working experience across a variety of roles in the IT telco space. Most of Ralph's experience is in corporate and multinational organizations, ranging from commercial financial management roles to strategy and consultative selling. More recently, the entrepreneurial Ralph has combined his tech business knowledge to work on embedding board management technology into the governance arena with an African context. So maybe just give us a high-level perspective, Ralph, on why is something like a tool like Onboard so important? I mean, let's try not to keep to specific products, but it's just in general, why does it make a difference? How is it contributing to this whole cybersecurity issue and a cyber safety issue?
Yeah, thanks, and thanks for the intro, Tim. Yeah, I think with a lot of evolutions, especially into a technical space. If you just think of internet banking as an example, where before you were going into branches and filling in pieces of paper, and then you started, doing things on the internet, and then suddenly mobile banking became a thing, and some people trusted and some people didn't, but it's evolved to a point where people trust it. So it's kind of the same thing. People tend to leave their board processes, they mechanize their own business and their own operations wherever and protect everything. But the board aspect of it is often still dealt with in old ways. Sometimes people are still emailing PDFs, storing stuff on shared drives, and all of these kind of things, just getting by with tech, but really not in a good way, and very open to those kind of issues. Of course, portals also sit on IT servers. They're not immune to those kind of things, but because of the nature of how they're built, they're encrypted all the way through. There's tons and tons of security aspects that are applied to ports. So it's your virtual boardroom in the sky, if you like. And as you said, you can climb in, you can see what's there, you can control who sees what. Obviously, there's a chain of command and a line of experience and responsibility that doesn't go away when you've got a tool like this, but it gives you all the capabilities you need to be as safe and secure. And that's really where portals are growing, and why more and more organizations really need to be migrating into that in some way or another.
Yeah, we're going to try and make sure we don't spend our lives looking at slides. So I will stop the share. So sorry if we've suddenly got very big and you've had to step back a little bit from your screen. Pacamilias, you had a question earlier?
Yes, what I wanted to find out from the panelists is that from a board level point of view, how do you convince the CEO and CFO to take cybersecurity seriously? Because the biggest issue that you have is that people will tell you we don't have the budget for it, and in normal cases they will tell you that we feel that our firewall is adequate enough, and it's only adequate enough until you are attacked.
Yeah, absolutely. So testing, we will ask Nico to give us a bit of a heads up on what kinds of things are available in security testing arena. It was interesting that I had a conversation with one of our cohorts on our applied directorate program just before this call, talking about what the role of a chairman is. And it's important to understand that the role of the board is to hold the CEO accountable to deliver against the strategy that the board has crafted. So if the board makes the decision and says, we need to be looking at cybersecurity, it's a key part of our risk matrix, it's our top 3, CEO, you need to do something about it. Give us a quote, give us some options. And it doesn't have to be a full-on, one of the big companies that costs you hundreds of thousands of rand to just throw everything at your organization to test it. There are multiple options that could be a lot more cost effective, just to give you a sense of how your comfort, you think you're comfortable. Now have a bit of a wake-up call to go, oh, actually, there's lots of stuff we need to fix. So you can break it down and prioritize it, et cetera, et cetera. But it needs to start from the board, and then the board needs to hold the CEO accountable. I saw that there's quite a few CEOs on this call, so maybe someone who is a CEO, be useful if you can just volunteer and give us your perspective on what might hold you back from implementing some kind of cybersecurity strategy. Who's going to be vulnerable? Anyone who's a CEO in the call, please, what did I say? Please step up. You should be able to unmute yourself. Welcome those I hadn't introduced earlier. So Rosalie. Oh, hi Nadine, long time no speak. Good to see you on the call. Dipesh. And I see, is it Czech from Casablanca? That's amazing. So that's definitely the winner. I don't think we've ever had anybody on one of these webinars from Casablanca. So definitely the winner. Okay.
I think while
so I'll hand over. They're all rather nervous and shy. So Nick, I'll hand over to you. Can you give us an insight on what some of those options might be for testing security?
Muster up the courage. Yeah, absolutely. So I think, like Tim mentioned earlier, there are some very cost-effective solutions that you could do or put in place to kind of get the lay of the land. In Afrikaans, we have this saying, "Die wat wil weet, moet meet," and that roughly translates to, if you want to know, you need to measure. So the best way to either prove that your cybersecurity or your security posture and culture really is up to scratch is to do some testing. Those can be in the form of simulated phishing. You can do some automated penetration testing. There's a ton of tools on the market that does that right now. But just to circle back to Pacamilia's question earlier, very good question and very timely question, because in the US, basically a week or two ago, there was a case where there was a cybersecurity company by the name of SolarWinds. They had a product which had a vulnerability and put all of their customers at risk. And that incident probably lasted, if memory serves correct, it was over a long period of time. So I think probably about around 2 years. And what had just happened is the SEC in the US have now sued not only the company SolarWinds, but their chief information security officer in his personal capacity for millions and millions of dollars on fraud charges for having defrauded both the customers and the shareholders on the severity of the incident, as well as the measures that they have in place. So I think the more the regulators are going to show their teeth, and in various different reasons. I mean, we've seen the information regulator in South Africa fine the Department of Justice, I think that was a month or two ago, 5 million rand for their data breach. And I mean, in South Africa, the POPIA Act does make a provision for the Chief Information Officer and the CEO to be personally liable for up to 10 million rands in fines and jail time of up to 10 years. So those are things that really are going to affect the individuals in those positions and probably will help you quite a bit convincing them to take this seriously.
Yeah, no, I'm just thinking of the example. We did a test with one of your products just to get a sense of how they worked and what kind of information was available. And the scariest bit was when it came up with stats of the ranking of the individuals in the team about how susceptible they were to clicking on things or clicking through things or capturing information into things, or had potentially passwords that were on a platform that had been breached at some point. So in other words, if you haven't changed that password since that breach, then you need to make damn sure that same password is not used somewhere else. I mean, it's a very cost-effective way of getting a good understanding of how bad the problem is before you even delve into ports and servers and all of those kind of things. Any questions? Please put in the chat box if you've got a question, or the Q&A. I think let's try this. Let's try this poll. Let's see who's really brave. Gavin, if you can just put up the poll for the anonymous poll. This is an anonymous poll. We're not capturing your name, even though we know your name on the chat. We're not capturing your name in this poll. Just if you have had a breach. That's really what we need to know. Yes or no. And unfortunately, the panelists can't answer. Wow, okay. Straight away, got 2. Any more? Give it a couple of seconds. So roughly 30% of the room has had some kind of breach. Now, the next question would be, are you brave enough to tell us what happened? But that's not compulsory. But it's real. I mean, as you said with those stats on that previous slide, this stuff is really real. I mean, Ralph, thinking about the data your platform's holding is massively sensitive. And there was also a case I read I was trying to find the article about someone who had tapped or recorded board meetings and sold the information and was now being sued. I don't know if you saw that article, Ralph, but I mean, that's very real. So how on earth do we keep this information out of people's sticky fingers? And what are the kind of security things that you have to have on a board paper platform? Because that's massive potential for sharing very sensitive information.
Yeah, absolutely. To the point you mentioned, there was a case just this weekend actually that came out in the press about IT employees that were dismissed because of that. And I think that really is it speaks to when I'm often talking to prospects who maybe just becoming aware of board portal software. They're going, well, we use Teams. we store our documents on the SharePoint server or whatever. And of course, companies have their own security, but IT has access to those. Of course, portal, as I mentioned, is obviously sitting in a secure cloud, but I think the levels of encryption and the compliance with the security acts like POPIA, GDPR is crucial to make sure that your platforms at least are covered in those. Then you're doing as much as you can to make sure that your portal is safe and secure. But to that point, as you say, it's and I think this is the thing. Even Teams, there's a lot of probably just lack of education, lack of awareness. People sort of say, "Can I share my board pack on a Teams screen?" And I think, again, if that's the case, unless everyone's sitting in the same room, how do you know where that person who's got a background that's hiding his real background, who's behind him, or her?
Yeah, you can't see this crowd of people behind me that's monitoring this call.
Correct. So, it's those kind of considerations. And as you say, the board information, the company confidential information is paramount that you need to protect, especially in an increasingly competitive age that we live in. So you just can't take those chances. But as I said, the portals have to comply with a whole bunch of stringent security certifications and verifications. So that's just something to look at.
Yeah, and it was something I thought about recently because we were working with a board where someone had resigned, and suddenly struck me that, particularly when we were talking about the cybersecurity thing, on the portal you just switch them off. And if you really want to be tough with the directors, you can stop them downloading things. So you can upload it, you can view it, you can look at your book online, etc. But you can't download it to anything else. And then as soon as you switch them off, they lose access and the papers disappear. With any other scenario, it's on their email, it's on their hard drive, it's on their laptop, it's all over the show, and there's very little control about where the information is sitting. So yeah, it's massive potential risk.
Maybe something that Nico will have some further input to, but it's exactly how many companies, once somebody leaves the organization or an independent director's term is up, do they secure that all the company information is wiped from their devices or from their computers, or from, as you say, emails go back, people can store and back up, etc., etc. So invariably that's not done, and then there's a risk there. As you say, with portals, you just switch them on or switch them off. New person comes in, they're able to access. So it's it's just a much more secure way to manage what I think is your most important information.
I mean, it's a big problem for us. That's why I'm thinking about it, and I try really hard to make sure that laptops get returned and they're cleaned and reformatted and all the rest of it, so the next person who gets that laptop doesn't end up with all the same information that the other person had, etc., etc. And it's a difficult and disciplined approach.
Absolutely. And I mean, data loss prevention really is a tricky subject, because I mean, once you send someone an email, can't really take it back. And increasingly in the age where we see BYOD, or bring your own device to work, unless you have stringent measures in place and you use mobile device management to correctly isolate business documents from personal documents, and the ability to containerize and remove those, you really will have a rough time. And obviously everyone in a product knows that is the most concerning topic. So when we look at SaaS products like Slack, Zoom, etc., all of them will price the features to do automated provisioning and deprovisioning of your users on the higher tier. And so oftentimes we see that's the first place that an SME will try to save costs. And that's really the only way that you can ensure, unless you have someone that's really on the ball, to ensure that timely and accurate offboarding happens for people that leave your organization. There's a massive security risk there for documents that outlive on their lifetime on people's devices, or people just retain access. Their accounts aren't locked or deprovisioned, and they just have access for weeks, days, months, years into the systems.
Yeah, I didn't show it early, but actually I was just going to share screen with this, because I think it's... Pacamila, before we get into that, you had a question.
Yeah, I just wanted to find out, one of your panelists said that you would normally do certain penetration tests. And I just wanted to find out from your side, how accurate and how secure are those penetration tests? And does that mean that and how often would you suggest, a client, to do those penetration tests?
So from a FinSwitch perspective, we used to use a professional company. That was their job. They would keep the people involved in the process to a minimum. They had all kinds of other internal controls, and we signed NDAs, and they promised to delete the data and that kind of stuff. I mean, they have to have access to some degree, but if they discover anything and breach anything, then that's all written into the SLA with the company. But they tried everything. So they tried the ports on your server, they tried email drops and phishing attacks. You could even pay a little bit more, and they would see how far they could get walking into your office. And if you can walk around the office and get to people's desks, and if people have got post-it notes all over the place, or you could, if that's really secure to get into the building, then you invite them in as a guest so that they've come into the building, and then they see how far they could get. Because a lot of the issues are people. They're not necessarily the hardware and software problems. It's people writing passwords, sticking them on their desk, keeping them in their phone. The phone gets stolen, all of those kind of things. Nico, do you want to give a perspective on that?
Absolutely. Yes, I mean, it's how long is a piece of string? So it's on the technical penetration test side. The automated test generally will cover your lowest hanging fruit, and they'll be pretty accurate. And it's very easy. I mean, if you get a result back, it's very easy to test the result and understand whether that's really accurate or not. Obviously, that's not going to cover I think the 1% where the real creativity of a real world threat actor resides is the thing that you probably will not really see any automated tool pick up. But as Tim mentioned, you can get teams who would do external penetration testing, or some of the bigger companies have both red teams and blue teams within the company. So the red teams and the blue teams are responsible for doing internal penetration testing. The product that we offer does simulated phishing attacks. So we would send phishing attacks to your employees with your permission, and we measure to a very great level of accuracy how people interact and whether they leak credentials or not. So those things are fairly accurate, I would say. In terms of what Tim was saying, if you go a little bit deeper and people try some more real-world social engineering tactics like cloning access cards, going into the building, pretending to be the fire extinguisher inspector, those things are a lot harder to detect. But you can pay for someone to do those tests.
Yeah, as you said, it's how long is a piece of string. What I wanted to just show, can everyone see that? This was an interesting, we had a webinar last week on marketing, and when we start talking about what the touch points are with marketing. So this is an answer to your question, Andrew, about ethics. So it's just as marketing needs to be part of your strategy, you need to use it internally, use it externally as a way of communicating with stakeholders, a good way of communicating with shareholders, et cetera. There's an opportunity for the marketing to touch most of these segments of our governance compass. Cybersecurity actually fits in to the same kind of thing, where you need to have it part of your strategy. There needs to be a culture of being aware of cybersecurity, which means that in part of your training, your leadership, you're training people on, you're testing people on an ongoing basis. There's a culture of, generally the organizational culture is that there's safety and security and being aware, and you need to constantly repeat that within the organization itself. And then it's thinking about what are the touch points. So, for example, we've been working with a bank recently, and this huge questionnaire about where does their data go? So is it shared with other people outside our organization? Who are they? What is their access? What can they see? What do we store? Where do we store it? All of those kind of things. So the whole cybersecurity question needs to be asked of anyone who has any access, legitimate access to your network, that you're sharing folders with, that you're sharing files with, all of those kind of things. Shareholders, so are they aware of the risks? Have we got insurance that they're aware of that can help pay for the costs so that they don't, the company doesn't fall apart and they don't lose millions as a result? Definitely needs to be on your risk matrix. If it's not on your risk matrix, then what is on your risk matrix? And then thinking about what the financial results are. So if we've mapped what is the potential impact, and you've given us some really good examples of how big that impact can be, then again, are we making provision for that? Are we putting cash aside for that? Is it one of those risks that you can insure using cyber risk insurance? It has a financial impact that we need to be aware of and talking about. And then evaluation and improvement is annually, are we doing a test? Are we checking what we thought was in place is in place? When did we last refresh our firewalls? When did we last make sure all our team updated their passwords? You know, cybersecurity forms part of every area of this strategy compass, and boards should be talking about it in different contexts frequently. So I'm just got a few things popped up on the screen here. Posts should be locked from copying info from computers or laptops. Also scan and embargo emails to personal email address with attachments. Yeah, very good ideas. Only sent to hosts. Oh, sorry. Yeah, so Edward, your question or your advice or guidance was, yeah, ports should be locked from copying info from computer or laptops. Also scan and embargo emails to personal email addresses with attachments. So it's definitely something that's worth looking into in your organization. And Eleanor, your question was, how do you stop employees leaving from taking confidential information with them to a competitor? So yeah, you can put something in their contract, but that doesn't necessarily hold water. You can take their laptop. So one way up potentially is they use a company laptop, then at least you can get a laptop back, but they could have copied stuff off onto a disk, etc. So, I mean, really the only way you can do it properly is to go into the home and search for all data and destroy anything that's got company logo related to it. But that might be something you have to do if you believe that there's been some kind of breach and they've sold it to a competitor. But usually it's the legal route, sharing IP, breach of confidentiality, something that's specifically mentioned in their contract. So first place would be check the contract and then understand, well, what is our response if this happens? So we can check with lawyers, what can we do? What can't we do? Must we just say, oh, well, it's happened. We actually had a similar problem, not so much that they took IP with them, but they took knowledge with them to a competitor, and we had a clause saying that a competitor or a client wasn't allowed to employ one of the staff, but it wasn't really going to the client, he was going via someone else, and it was all very complicated. So it's definitely scenario planning, definitely thinking about different things you can and can't do, and start with something in writing. So the person can't say, no, I didn't know, or here's the policy. You've signed that you've read the policy, and now you've gone and done this. It comes back to that ethics point that you made earlier, Andrew. If they don't have ethics, they'll find a way.
100%, Tim. And I mean, that's one half of the equation. So the other thing to consider is also insider threats. So not only when someone leaves an organization, but when someone is actively in the organization and distributing information from within that company. So a couple of years ago, I believe there was a case at Twitter where an individual seemed to have been specifically sent by the Chinese government to work inside Twitter and report back to them on the goings on and the IP within the company. So insider threat management is also something really, really serious to consider. And I mean, that goes back to just how do you mitigate that flow of information? So oftentimes, a topic that's becoming more and more popular is kind of zero trust security, and that's to ensure that each individual only has access to the minimum informational systems that they really need to perform their job function. And I mean, that's really the opposite of what we see in especially smaller companies where, you know, if you're a company of 20 or 30 people, everyone shares access to the network drive and everyone shares access to the Wi-Fi and the same Wi-Fi that's hosting the financial system and just the regular work people. And the other thing is we're also seeing bigger companies do is that if you're on a device, it will typically be a company-owned device. All networking goes through a company-owned appliance, and that scans every bit of information that flows from that machine to any other machine. And through data inspection, they can see and block specific flows of information. So it is a very, very difficult thing to really achieve.
Yes, absolutely. Any other questions? So we've had some people who've joined the conversation. Thank you very much for those of you who've put posts so far. Anything from you, Shane, Shakira, Rosalie? Any questions, any comments? Pakimilia, whilst we're waiting for others, you had another question, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I just wanted to find out, we tend to find that if you look at in the South African banking system, I'm not too sure how often it happens, but you tend to see, for example, let me make an example with FNB and Standard Bank, where they are attacked, you know, quite a number of times, even though they won't mention it, they go public about it, but you can pick up at times, and especially it tends to happen over weekends. And you find that they have the most sophisticated cybersecurity system that they work with. But why is it that occasionally they would be attacked or hacked, or you know, yeah.
Any insight on that one, Nico? I mean, I think if you get attacked as a listed company or a bank, particularly, you need to report it, don't you?
You need that's not only listed. So POPIA and the information regulator requires you to report any breach, whether you're private or public. That is a requirement. You have to do that. I mean, I can't really speak to the banks and their incidents that they've had, but I mean, it's one of those things that you can risk not telling anyone and hope that you get away with it, or you know what's the old saying, the cover-up is always worse than the crime. So yes. if you do get breached and you don't report it, and you have actively taken steps to not report it, the regulator is not going to look on that very kindly.
Yep.
I see we have a question there from Rosalie. Where should an SME start with cybersecurity? And do you have a starter package for SMEs? I think the best place for an SME to start with cybersecurity is education. Make everyone in your team understand the seriousness and the impact and the role that each individual has to play. So definitely implement a regular cybersecurity awareness program and keep that on people's minds. It's also a good idea, if you don't have the skills in-house, look to experts outside. So either get an MSP or a managed service provider that can take care of your IT infrastructure and your needs. Definitely look to a team like Ralph's who can help you secure that board level information. But the lowest hanging fruit, I would definitely say, is educating your team and making everyone understand. And to your question, yes, we do have a starter package. I just want to share a little anecdote, which was very nice for us to see. So our offering is that we do send these simulated phishing attacks, and then we obviously see how people interact with it. But we've had such great feedback from the teams that have been on our pilot, where they have very active Slack or WhatsApp groups for their teams internally. And it's really so encouraging to see when we fire off a campaign and people inside of the company actively start talking about this and warning other employees or their colleagues to say, I've just received this from SARS, is it real? The email address looks funny. And then other people would chime in and say, no, that's definitely a scam. And that's really what you want in your company. You want a culture of, first of all, talking about these things, but also a non-retaliatory culture. So if someone does make a mistake, and it happens to everyone, on the best days with the right motivation, everyone is going to click that phishing email or open that attachment. But the most important thing is to have people in a safe culture where they can report it without fear of retaliation, so that can be remediated in a timely and an effective manner, instead of staying quiet and hoping no one finds out that they clicked it.
Yeah, that definitely needs to start from the top. So what was the
Correct.
most interesting learning from when you attacked us was the LinkedIn connection posts. Because if it hadn't been something which you've probably corrected, so I'll probably get caught next time. But it was only because there was a request for a connection. I get lots of requests for a connection. The person's title sounded interesting, so I went to the next step of clicking connect, but then it went to the wrong page. I wasn't expecting it to go to the page that it went to. And it was like, oh, hold on, check the URL. Yeah, I'll go into LinkedIn and see if that person's on LinkedIn. No, they're not on LinkedIn. Okay, it's one of Nico's. But then, yeah, immediately warn everybody in the organization, look out for LinkedIn connection requests.
It's quite interesting. So we have different gradings for our tests. So they vary between easy, medium, and hard. And what's interesting, people often ask me now, like, I get these phishing emails, but they're full of spelling mistakes and grammar errors.
Yeah.
And the theory behind that is actually a tactic. It's done on purpose, because the person who still interacts with a message beyond that obvious red flag will be a lot easier to goes into making the bigger mistake or making the bigger payment further down the line, than if you just sent them a perfectly formatted message initiating the conversation in the first place.
So it's a way of sifting out the good and the bad candidates for
Correct.
fraud.
Correct.
Cool.
That's proper phishing.
I don't know if anybody wants to share any experience that they've had with phishing attacks, and if anyone's prepared to own up, or not own up, but share their experience where they were actually attacked. Otherwise, yeah, I've just stuck the poll up. If you'd like to get in contact with Ralph about anything to do with board software, please, or just find out a little bit more about what he's doing in that space, then please, yeah, tick the box to get a free consult. Nico, same. And for me, if you've got any questions about your board or your governance structures in your business, and looking for training, or just a chat about what might be a good way of taking your career forward as a director, then please, yeah, just tick the box, and happy to have a free consult. And specifically, if you'd like any director training information, then happy to send that, or anything to do with the board support overall. So thinking about helping you build the board, helping you put the proper processes in as part of your board, going through things like the governance compass. I'm happy to help. Any last questions? Where should I've got Rosalie's one? Thank you. It was a great question. I think Rosalie was the last. If there's no other questions, then next is to thank you for spending your time with us. I hope it was useful. I hope everyone learned something from the exercise. I certainly did. Some good reminders and some new things I wasn't aware of. So thank you, Nico and Ralph. And I wish everybody all the best in making their businesses more cyber secure.